quiet life, a perfect marriage, and a secret too dangerous to keep. It was a delicate balance, a life built on routine and trust, until the lines blurred and everything unraveled. If you're curious to see how this story unfolds, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments. Don't miss this emotionally charged tale full of twists and turns. Let's begin. My name is Michael Turner. At 40 years old, I had built the life I always thought I wanted. A beautiful home in the suburbs, a stable career as an architect, and a devoted wife, Lauren, who worked tirelessly as a nurse. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. But what no one knew, what even I couldn't admit to myself until recently, was that something was missing. Or maybe someone. That someone came into my life unexpectedly. His name was Ethan Carter, a 22-year-old college student I met during a community charity event. Ethan was charming, full of life, and had a wit that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. At first, I told myself it was admiration, a harmless connection, but the more we talked, the more I felt a pull toward him that I couldn't explain or resist. It started innocently enough. Casual conversations turned into regular texts. Then came the first time I invited him over while Lauren was working a double shift at the hospital. It's just friendly, I told myself. Nothing wrong with company. But the moment Ethan stepped into my home, I felt the tension between us shift. That evening, we talked for hours. Ethan sat across from me on the couch, his eyes catching the light in a way that made it impossible to look away. He shared stories about his dreams of becoming a filmmaker and his struggles with juggling school and part-time jobs. I listened intently, but part of me was hyper-aware of how close he was, of how his presence made my chest tighten and my thoughts race. "I don't know how you manage it all," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He smiled, leaning back with a confidence that was both disarming and magnetic. "You learn to survive. Besides, I think I'm better under pressure." Something in the way he said it made my breath hitch. There was an unspoken connection, an electricity in the air. I knew I should step away, break whatever spell was forming, but I couldn't. As the weeks passed, Ethan became a regular visitor. Lauren's demanding schedule provided ample opportunities for me to invite him over without suspicion. Each time, the boundaries blurred a little more. A touch on the arm lingered too long. A laugh was shared with too much intimacy. And then, one night, it happened. We were sitting on the couch sharing a bottle of wine I'd opened impulsively. Ethan was telling a story, his laughter filling the room, when he suddenly stopped and looked at me. "You're different, Michael," he said, his tone softer now. "There's something about you that I can't quite figure out." I felt the words catch in my throat. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "I just feel like I can be myself around you. Like you see me in a way no one else does." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I knew what I wanted to say, what I wanted to do, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I broke eye contact and cleared my throat. "Maybe we should call it a night." Ethan nodded, but there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes as he stood. "Yeah, sure. Thanks for tonight, Michael." As I watched him leave, I felt a pang of regret, but also relief. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, one that could shatter everything I'd built. But as the door closed behind him, I also knew that it wouldn't be the last time he stepped into my home or my life. The days following Ethan's visit felt like a blur. I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts that lingered in the back of my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his laughter, his smile, or the way he looked at me. It was intoxicating, and terrifying. Lauren's schedule became my unwitting accomplice. Her double shifts at the hospital left the house quiet and empty, a perfect cover for my growing connection with Ethan. I told myself each time he visited that it would be the last, that I was only risking everything because I was lonely. But when Ethan texted me, asking if he could stop by again, I didn't hesitate to say yes. That evening, the tension between us was palpable from the moment he walked through the door. He greeted me with his usual smile, but there was something different in his demeanor, something bolder. He brought a stack of films he wanted to show me, claiming he needed a second opinion for a project he was working on. "You're my critic tonight," he said, dropping onto the couch and tossing a DVD case onto the coffee table. "I'll try to be gentle," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But as I sat down beside him, I realized how close we were. My pulse quickened. We spent the next hour watching his film, discussing his edits and storytelling choices. Ethan was animated, gesturing with his hands as he explained his vision. I couldn't help but admire his passion. It was contagious, and for a moment I forgot about the lines we were crossing. "You've got talent, Ethan," I said when the credits rolled. "This is really impressive. Coming from you, that means a lot," he replied, his voice softer now. He turned to face me, and suddenly the air shifted. The casual ease of the evening gave way to a tension that neither of us could ignore. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Michael, do you ever feel like there's something more here?" I froze. His words hung in the air, heavy and charged. My instinct was to deny it, to brush it off as a misunderstanding. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew I couldn't lie. Not to him, not to myself. "Ethan, My voice faltered and I looked away. "This isn't right." "Why not?" he asked, his tone gentle but insistent. "We're not doing anything wrong by feeling something." "You don't understand what's at stake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have a wife. A life I've built. If this goes any further—" Ethan reached out, his hand lightly brushing against mine. The contact sent a shiver through me. "I don't want to complicate your life, Michael, but I can't ignore how I feel, and I don't think you can either." I pulled my hand back, my heart pounding. "Ethan, you should go." He hesitated, his expression a mix of disappointment and hurt, but he nodded, grabbing his bag and heading for the door. As the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned back on the couch, my mind racing. I'd done the right thing, I told myself, but the ache in my chest told a different story. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on, to convince myself that I could bury whatever it was I felt for Ethan. I focused on work, made extra efforts to be present for Lauren, and ignored the buzzing phone on my nightstand every time Ethan's name appeared on the screen. But no matter how hard I tried, he was always there, in my thoughts, in my dreams, in the growing void that I couldn't fill. One night, Lauren came home after a grueling shift at the hospital. Her exhaustion was palpable as she dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes. "Long day?" I asked, handing her a glass of wine. "The worst," she sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "We're so short-staffed, I'm working another double this weekend." Her words hit me harder than they should have. Another weekend, another opportunity. I hated the way my mind immediately went to Ethan, but the thought of seeing him again sent a wave of excitement through me that I couldn't suppress. That Saturday, the house felt too quiet after Lauren left for her shift. I paced the living room, debating whether to reach out to Ethan. Every logical part of me screamed to let it go, to stay in control. But when I picked up my phone, my fingers moved almost of their own accord. "Come over." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Ethan arrived an hour later, his smile brighter than I'd remembered. He carried a box of takeout and a bottle of wine, as if this were just another casual visit. But as he stepped inside, the unspoken tension between us was undeniable. "Thought we could keep it simple tonight," he said, holding up the food. "No heavy conversations." I nodded, grateful for the reprieve. We settled on the couch, eating and watching a movie. For a while, it felt easy, normal even. But as the credits rolled, silence filled the room, and I felt his eyes on me. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, breaking the calm. "Did I do something wrong?" I turned to him, my chest tightening. "No, Ethan, it's not you. It's me. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." "Dangerous doesn't mean wrong," he countered, his voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "You feel it too, don't you?" I couldn't answer. The truth was written all over my face, and he knew it. Ethan moved closer, his hand lightly brushing my arm. "Michael," he whispered, his tone both a question and a plea. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. His lips met mine, soft and warm, and everything else faded away. For a brief moment there was no guilt, no fear, just us. When we pulled apart, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. I stood abruptly, running a hand through my hair. "This was a mistake," I muttered, pacing the room. Ethan stood too, his expression hurt but determined. It didn't feel like a mistake to me. "I can't do this," I said, avoiding his gaze. "You should go." He hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but eventually nodded. "I'll leave. But this isn't over, Michael, you know it." As he walked out the door, I felt a mix of relief and longing. I knew he was right, this wasn't over, and that terrified me. The days following that night were torturous. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. "This isn't over, Michael, you know it." He was right, it wasn't over, not for him, and certainly not for me. No matter how much I tried to focus on my life with Lauren, every thought circled back to Ethan. His touch, his kiss, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Lauren was oblivious. Her work schedule consumed her, and when she was home she was too exhausted to notice my restless behavior. But the guilt was eating me alive. Every time I looked at her, I felt like a fraud. She trusted me completely, and here I was, betraying her in ways I never imagined I could. That Saturday, when Lauren left for another double shift, I told myself it would be different. I wouldn't call Ethan. I wouldn't let this spiral any further. But as the hours dragged on and the silence of the house grew unbearable, I found myself reaching for my phone again. Ethan arrived that evening, his usual carefree demeanor tempered by something more serious. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and for a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. "I wasn't sure you'd call," he said softly. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. He moved closer, his eyes searching mine. "Why do you keep fighting this, Michael? What are you so afraid of?" "Everything," I said, my voice breaking. "Losing my wife, my life, everything I've built. This isn't who I'm supposed to be." Ethan placed a hand on my cheek, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Maybe it's exactly who you're supposed to be. Maybe you've been living someone else's life this whole time." His words struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had been running on autopilot, fulfilling roles and expectations without ever questioning if they were truly mine. But the thought of stepping outside that carefully constructed life was terrifying. Before I could respond, he kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. It was raw and consuming, and I gave into it completely. For the first time in years, I felt alive. We spent hours talking that night, lying on the couch in a tangle of limbs and whispered confessions. Ethan told me about his fears, his dreams, and the loneliness he carried despite his confident exterior. I shared parts of myself I had kept buried for so long that I had almost forgotten they were there. But as the night wore on, reality began to creep back in. I glanced at the clock and felt a jolt of panic. Lauren would be home soon. "Ethan, you have to go," I said, sitting up quickly. He frowned, but nodded. "All right, but Michael, this can't keep being a secret forever." I didn't respond. As he gathered his things and headed for the door, I felt a pang of guilt and longing. When the door closed behind him, the weight of my choices settled heavily on my chest. The following days were a storm I could barely navigate. I couldn't look at Lauren without feeling the crushing weight of guilt, and yet I couldn't bring myself to let go of Ethan. The duality of my life was tearing me apart, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. That Saturday, Lauren left for her shift as usual, kissing me goodbye before heading out the door. "Don't wait up," she said with a tired smile, her scrubs already wrinkled from a long week. As soon as she was gone, I picked up my phone and sent the now familiar message to Ethan. "Come over." He arrived within an hour, his presence filling the house with an energy that both comforted and unnerved me. This time, there was no hesitation, no small talk. The moment he stepped inside, our lips met, the weight of the past few weeks pouring into every touch. We moved to the couch, tangled in each other, and for a while, the outside world didn't exist. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But as we lay there, his head resting on my chest, a familiar sound shattered the tranquility, the front door opening. "Michael, I forgot my—" Lauren's voice cut through the room like a knife. I froze, my heart stopping as her words trailed off. She stood in the doorway, her bag dangling from her hand, her face a mixture of confusion, hurt, and fury. "What? What is this?" she stammered, her eyes darting between Ethan and me. "Lauren, I can explain," I started, but the words felt hollow even to me. Ethan sat up quickly, his face pale. "I should go," he mumbled, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. Lauren didn't stop him. Her focus was entirely on me. When the door slammed shut behind Ethan, the silence that followed was deafening. "How long?" she asked, her voice shaking. I couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. How long, Michael?" she demanded, her tone rising. "Not long," I admitted. It happened, and I didn't know how to stop it." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Didn't know how to stop it? Michael, we're married. How could you do this to me? To us?" I tried to speak, to explain the unexplainable, but every word felt inadequate. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, before shaking her head and grabbing her bag. "I need time," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be here right now." "Lauren, please." I reached for her, but she stepped back, her expression a mix of heartbreak and anger. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, my entire world crumbling around me. The hours after Lauren left felt like an eternity. The silence in the house was suffocating, and every corner seemed to echo with the weight of what had just happened. I sat on the couch where Ethan and I had been moments before, trying to piece together how everything had unraveled so quickly. I knew this moment would come. I had lied to myself, believing I could balance my double life indefinitely, but the reality was here now, raw and inescapable. The question was, what now? Lauren didn't return that night, nor the following day. She left no messages, and every call I made went straight to voicemail. The weight of her absence was unbearable. I replayed her expression in my mind: shock, betrayal, anger, It was the face of a woman whose world had been shattered by the person she trusted most. Ethan texted me once, "Are you okay?" I couldn't bring myself to reply. He deserved answers too, but I didn't have them. All I knew was that I was caught between two lives, and the fallout had begun. 3 days later, Lauren finally came home. The sound of her key turning in the lock sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. She stepped inside, her face unreadable, and placed her bag on the counter. "We need to talk," she said simply, her tone devoid of emotion. I nodded, motioning for her to sit, but she remained standing. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the hurt still lingering there. "How long have you been lying to me?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. "Lauren, it wasn't," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't say it wasn't serious, Michael. I saw enough to know that's a lie." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't plan for this to happen." "No one plans for something like this," she said bitterly. "But you let it happen, and you lied to me every time I walked out that door." Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper. But I couldn't argue. She was right. "Do you love him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a freight train. I hadn't allowed myself to think about it, to confront the truth behind what I felt for Ethan. But as I stood there facing the wreckage of my choices, I realized the answer. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking. "What I feel for him, it's complicated, but I know it doesn't change what I feel for you." Lauren's laugh was hollow. "What you feel for me? Michael, love isn't supposed to be shared. You've broken something in us, and I don't know if it can ever be fixed." I wanted to argue, to beg for forgiveness, but the look in her eyes told me it was pointless. She had already made up her mind. "I'm leaving," she said, standing tall despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "I need space to figure out if there's anything left for us to save." Her words hung in the air as she grabbed her bag and walked out the door. This time, I knew she wasn't coming back anytime soon. In the weeks that followed, I was forced to confront the man I had become. I had been living a lie, not just with Lauren, but with myself. My feelings for Ethan were real, but so was the destruction I had caused. Lauren's departure left a void, but it also gave me clarity. I needed to rebuild, to understand who I was and what I wanted before I could even think about asking for forgiveness. From her, from Ethan, or from myself. Life is rarely as simple as we want it to be. Sometimes the choices we make hurt the people we love the most. But within that pain lies the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to face the truths we've been avoiding. What would you do if faced with such a choice? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more emotionally charged stories like this one. See you next time.